Record.
I'm going to do the intro again. So hi, I call the meeting to order, I guess now at 10:02 a.m. For the CCS Special Governing Board meeting. Beth, could you do roll?
Yes, I'll do by library name, if you could please speak your first and last name for the record. Algonquin.
Sarah, you're muted.
Well, let's try that again. Sarah Murray.
Thank you. Carrie.
Diane McNulty.
Crystal Lake.
Catherine Martins.
Displains.
Joe Bonell.
Ela. Evanston. I see Tim. Fox River Valley.
Lauren Rosenthal.
Fremont.
Hi, Scott Davis.
Glencoe.
Andy Kim.
Glenview.
Harry Room.
Grays Lake.
Sarah Brown.
Highland Park.
Chad Clark.
Huntley.
Frank Novak.
Indian Trails.
Ryan Shepard.
Lake Forest. Lake Villa.
Nick Jacobson.
Lincolnwood. McHenry. Morton Grove.
Pam Leffler.
Niles, Maine.
Susan Lemke.
Northbrook.
Kate Hall.
Palatine.
Jeannie Dilcher.
Park Ridge. Prospect Heights.
Alex Big Slick Todd.
Round Lake. Wilmette.
Anthony Austin.
Winnetka. Emily, I think you're muted, but I see you. And Zion Benton, sorry.
Matt Womack.
All right, and it looks like Erica is joining.
For Ela.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Any other libraries that maybe have them?
Who were we missing?
Ela, we have Lake Forest.
We're not expecting Lake Forest.
Lincolnwood. McHenry. Park Ridge. And Round Lake.
And Tim did comment in the chat that he's here.
Okay, thank you. And then present from CCS, we have Rebecca Malinowski, Deborah Wishmeyer, and Beth Stonebrenner.
All right, and I'm going to ask Rebecca to mute us, everyone. And then if you need to talk, unmute yourself. Okay. So do we have any additions to the agenda? Okay, moving on to public comment. I know normally I would mention this like in my president's thing, but I think everyone heard. I just want to welcome Matt Womack back as the interim director for Zion Benton. So not to be confused, Nick Jacobson is now at Lake Villa, Matt is now at Zion Benton, and Erica is still at Ela. So just make sure you have your people in the right libraries. But welcome, Matt. We're excited to have you back. So next up, we have the consent agenda. We do need to pull the minutes out. There was the motion that started CCS policy regarding pickup that we need to note in the minutes that this was a recommendation from executive committee and doesn't need a second. We didn't have that in the minutes. All of the other motions were modified from the executive committee recommendation. So I'm going to pull those out. We're going to vote on those separately. But does anyone have anything else that they want to pull out from the consent agenda? That would still include the May financial statements, May bills, the policy updates, and the fine-free waive criteria. All right, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented.
So moved, Alex Todd.
Thanks, Alex. And a second?
Brian Shepherd, second.
Thanks, Brian. Beth, could you please do roll? Oh,
Beth,
and Beth,
you-
you're muted, so we can't hear you calling people.
Good, because I already messed up. Okay, you can hear me now. Prospect Heights,
Aye.
Wilmette,
Aye.
Winnetka,
Yes.
Zion,
Aye.
Algonquin,
Yes.
Carrie,
Yes.
Crystal Lake,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Ela,
Yes.
Evanston, is there a wave from?
Tim,
thank
Tim
you.
Longo said
Yep.
yes in the chat.
Fremont,
Yes.
Glencoe,
Yes.
Glenview,
Yes.
Grays Lake,
Yes.
Highland Park,
Yes.
Huntley,
Yes.
Indian Trails,
Yes.
Lake Villa,
Yes.
Morton Grove,
Yes.
Niles,
Yes.
Northbrook.
Yes, and Heidi logged on, so Park Ridge is now here.
Thank you. Palatine
Yes.
and Park Ridge.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
All right, great. So then I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended. Again, that amendment would be adding a note that the recommendation for the motion that started the CCS policy regarding pickup came from executive committee and didn't need a second. Everything else would be the same unless there are any other changes.
I have two things.
Okay.
I don't know if we need to add a note that Andy Kim was acting secretary.
I don't think we do because we have that stated in the minutes and that's been, we have it listed at the bottom and that's what we've done every other time. So I think that we can continue with precedent.
And then in the motion before the one that came from executive committee, there's a word missing. So it says, based on the REAL's guidance until new research calls for revision to either the length of the quarantine period. So I think there's a word missing in that motion.
Rebecca, could you unmute?
I did unmute. So the motion is that the motion is correct as it's written until either the length of the quarantine period, that's the first part of the either, or the phases in which it is required. Yeah, until new research calls for a revision to either the length of the quarantine period or the phases in which it is required. So I don't know what.
Sarah, you're muted.
I read that several times and I was missing something, but now when you say it out loud, then it makes sense.
Oh, I'm magic. I'll take it.
Thanks.
Okay, any other amendments to the minutes?
The one thing I was wondering is in our roll call chart, it shows Lincolnwood as present, but they're absent in everything else. So I didn't know if the chart was supposed to indicate whether or not someone was present.
Beth is looking at her notes.
And that is correct. Lincolnwood was not present, so that needs to be updated.
Okay, so we have two amendments on the minutes. One is to note that Lincolnwood was absent, and the other to note that the recommendation starting the CCS policy regarding pickup came from executive committee and does not need a second. Any other amendments to the minutes? All right, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved. This is Pam from Morton Grove.
Thanks, Pam.
Second.
Second.
Catherine Martins.
Okay,
Kim
thanks.
Martins.
Thanks, Kim. Any further discussion? All right, Beth, could you please do roll?
I'll start with Morton Grove,
Yes.
Jasmine,
Yes.
Northbrook,
Yes.
Palatine,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
Prospect Heights, Wilmette,
Yes.
Winnetka,
Yes.
Zion,
Yes.
Algonquin,
Yes.
Carrie,
Yes.
Crystal Lake,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Gila,
Yes.
Evanston, Fox River Valley,
Yes.
Fremont,
Yes.
Glencoe,
Yes.
Glenview,
Yes.
Grays Lake,
Yes.
Highland Park,
Yes.
Huntley,
Yes.
Indian Trails,
Yes.
Lake Villa.
Yes.
That's it.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone.
Lincolnwood, I'm sorry, I got in a little late. Lincolnwood is here.
Oh, hey, Joe. Great. So next up, we have essential business, election of a secretary. As many of you undoubtedly know, I can't remember if we announced it. No, we didn't announce it at the last meeting because we didn't know. Jane Conway is retiring from Highland Park effective June 30th. Chad, who is on the call with us, has been named interim director. So congrats, Chad. And she was our CCS secretary. She still had one more year on her term. Diane McNulty said that she would be willing to take on this wonderful task. And so I moved to nominate her for secretary for the next fiscal year. So her term would end in June of 2021. Do we have any other nominations from the floor? Okay, great. Then I just need a motion to elect Diane McNulty from Cary Area Public Library as Secretary of CCS for the next fiscal year to fill out Jane Conway's term.
So moved.
I'll give it to Joe and Bonell from Des Plaines, and a second.
Second.
Thanks,
Scott Davis.
Scott Davis from Fremont. Any further discussion on the motion? All right, Beth, could you do roll?
I'll start with Des Plaines,
Yes.
Gila,
Yes.
Evanston,
He said yes in the chat.
Fox River Valley,
Yes.
Fremont,
Yes.
Glencoe,
Yes.
Glenview,
Yes.
Grays Lake,
Yes.
Highland Park,
Yes.
Huntley,
Yes.
Indian Trails,
Yes.
Lake Villa,
Yes.
Lincolnwood,
Yes.
Morgan Grove,
Yes.
Niles,
Yes.
Northbrook,
Yes.
Palatine,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
Prospect Heights,
Yep.
Wilmette,
Yes.
Winnetka,
Yes.
Zion,
Yes.
Algonquin,
Yes.
Carrie,
Yes.
and Crystal Lake.
Yes.
All right, great. And I just want to thank Diane for being willing to take on this role for the next year. It's much appreciated. Next up, we have more talk about COVID. I know, right? Such a shock. So Rebecca is going to share with us some updates from Rails, and then we're going to talk about delivery.
So the big update from Rails, I think all of your libraries hopefully were represented at the Rails member update on June 10th when they introduced their plan for restarting delivery. Yesterday, I did get a sneak peek at their draft FAQ based on the questions that came out of that, that meeting, and I think that it's going to resolve a lot of the issues that folks had that needed to be answered. They're also working on a flow chart to help understand like when things need to be quarantined and how that process is going to work. I'm expecting that will be out before the end of the week. They had a pretty robust draft yesterday and we're really hustling to get it done. Consortium managers are also meeting tomorrow to go over delivery with Rails there. So if there's any additional information that comes out of that meeting that needs to go out, we'll put it in the newsletter on Friday and send it out to the listservs just for extra double whammy. The two biggest questions that I think came out of the member update that you or your staff might be concerned about. One was, you know, something's been quarantined in my library for 7 days, and then my staff touch it to put it in a bin. I don't have to like restart my 7-day count, right? That is correct. You don't have to restart your 7-day count. If they are saying in the FAQ that items will need to be quarantined when from the last time they were touched by like an unknown entity. So, you know, your patrons, you know, we can't assume that they're wearing masks and gloves and like doing proper hand hygiene in their house, but we can assume that your staff at the library who are handling materials are following proper safety procedures. Rails is also not requiring, because the, you know, an incoming quarantine period. So from delivery, they're certainly recommending that libraries follow your internal safety procedures, but they're not saying you have to quarantine for 7 days. After receiving the materials, their staff, both Rails and CTL staff who will be handling materials, will all be wearing masks and will either wear gloves or, well, even if they're wearing gloves, they'll have access to hand washing and hand sanitizer and be trained on and required to follow proper sanitary procedures. So there will be more details coming out in that area. The other thing that we did clarify yesterday with the CERC group that we'll send out again, and I believe it was a question that someone sent me this morning about delivery, was what about, oh, Sarah, I think that was one of your questions. What about the stuff that's already in bins? We had originally said Rails was just gonna like send it to the library that it belongs to, the home library. That's still true, but they are asking that you relabel the stuff in the bin. So your staff need to go through and rehandle the material that's in your blue bins ready to go out and label it to the home library. So I will ask member services staff, sorry, Deborah, I didn't ask you to do this yet, just to recommend a best practice.
I'm not changing my.
Don't mess with the video, the meeting.
I think that probably it makes the most sense for the outgoing library to decline the hold, but I'll leave that to Deborah and she'll pop in a quick instruction on that when we resend that out to the newsletter. There is no new update since June 4th on the Realm study, which is the other thing. Rails did confirm that if the Realm study presents a recommendation that's different from a 7-day quarantine, that they would change their recommendation. And what we all agreed on was that when we restart delivery, we'll follow the Rails recommendation. And so Rails is writing down in their FAQ that they will update their recommendation based on that study. So I'm happy to take other questions on that. I mean, we can still talk about restarting Rails delivery, but that's the update from the member update. On that.
Questions for Rebecca?
Unmute. I have a question.
Okay.
Now that I've unmuted myself, I can repeat what I said. So my staff had understood from the CCS CERC meeting yesterday that the second Rails delivery, which is what, June 25th, that in here it explains it the way I understood it, the update, that they were doing the kind of get everything back to the home library route again. But they understood that we would only get delivery on June 25th if we were resuming regular delivery. So I need clarification on that.
Yeah, so that I probably just didn't communicate clearly in that CERC update. So you will get delivery on the 25th, whether or not you're resuming delivery, but they won't pick up material. According to the draft FAQ I saw, so this could still change, they're not planning to pick up material from libraries on the 25th unless you're resuming delivery.
So that I'd like to suggest we push back on them, because then, I mean, it helps for me to get my stuff back, but the rest of the stuff is just going to be sitting there then. you know.
Other questions for Rebecca? No? Okay, so Rebecca does have, we're going to move on now to talk about Rails delivery at CCS. And so Rebecca does have a recommendation in the packet, which is that we resume delivery as a group, but not before our July 8th governing board meeting. So I wanted to get people's thoughts on the recommendation and see what people think in general about starting delivery.
All right, I'll ask a question again. I guess I'm the questioner. So does resuming delivery also mean that we are then opening up to resource sharing? Or does it just mean that we're trying to get materials back to each other?
So that's a really good question, Kim. And Jeannie actually called me yesterday with the same question. So my recommendation in the packet is that we don't do either. And we do the 18th and the 25th, like big bulk of sending stuff back, but that we don't resume delivery or resource sharing until the next governing board meeting, and then reassess. And that was my recommendation, just looking at like pick list counts and holds placed and all of that. And Jeannie pointed out yesterday, and I think what you're getting at here is we could do delivery without turning the holds, without making holds changes in the client.
Agree.
So that's not the recommendation in the packet, but I think that's really something that should be considered and discussed.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think we still need to sort a lot of stuff out, in my opinion, and we don't know and where this is going in terms of the COVID, and some of what I'm hearing the experts say is, let's not get ahead of ourselves. That we don't know how it's going to work out over the next, this phase or the next little bit, and we still need to proceed cautiously. And I've been saying that to my staff too. It's really easy to feel like, oh, we're free, and it's sunny and we're outside and, it all feels normal, but it's not. And so I know I don't want to regress. So I'd rather we proceed cautiously and then not have to.
Save lives by not sharing, right?
Yes, for now.
Yeah,
for now.
right.
And really, even in the state library newsletter, it said that the resource sharing, reciprocal borrowing, and interlibrary loan, they're suspending that through August as a requirement to be a member of a system. So to me, that's saying, let's all just take a pause.
Yeah. Jeannie, you had something?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to argue for allowing libraries to choose to resume delivery, but not the resource sharing. Because we all have all of this stuff building up in our libraries, and I'm out of bins, and I'm out of folding tables, and I'm out of space. And if I have stuff that needs to go back to another library, and I've already quarantined it for 7 days, and I know that that library is going to want to quarantine it for another 7 days when it arrives, I mean, why not at least let Rails deliver those things and start that process, even if we're not doing the resource sharing, which I totally agree with. Just having more and more stuff build up in my library isn't helpful for me. It doesn't help you get stuff back on your shelves to be able to check out to people. So I would argue for resuming delivery.
So it sounds like what we have, Kim and Jeannie are talking about, is resuming delivery so that when patrons return items that are not ours to our library, we can simply get them home. There's not, it doesn't sound like either of you are suggesting that we turn on holds sharing within the individual libraries, which would, again, on a case-by-case basis, I would argue that we shouldn't do that because that would be very challenging for CCS, and I don't think we should be sharing resources. So what are people's thoughts about restarting delivery simply to get our items back to their home libraries?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
is that allowed under Rail's delivery guidelines? Are you allowed to say, you know, we want to benefit from having our stuff come back, but we're not going to fulfill any holds, only our own holds? I mean, are you allowed to do that? Or if you participate, are you supposed to be a lender as well?
Yeah, they haven't referenced that either way in any of their documentation. They have certainly acknowledged that they know that libraries are, as Kim pointed out from the state library, you know, limiting services in different capacities during this time. So they haven't said you can't do delivery unless you're going to share stuff. What they have said is they want to be here for libraries and be providing the services they need. So I don't think it would be an issue. I think you'd all certainly see a much smaller volume overall. But
can we be limited then that we only request, like only our own stuff would fill holds and no non-CCS libraries would be grabbed to fill our holds either?
Well, no holds. Only holds on your own items by your patrons.
Right.
yeah, so we leave the pick list settings like they are right now. So, you know, some libraries are allowing non-local patrons to place holds for pickup at their library, but only their material is going to fill those holds. So it's not transiting material. So we leave those settings as they are, and essentially, you know, as others have said already, as your patrons return things, if they belong to another library, they'll get transited back to that library by the system. And Deborah, if I'm missing a problem, jump in.
Deborah, you're muted.
No, that sounds correct, Rebecca. One other thing to bring up, we already have received a question from some Share Illinois libraries who are wondering when CCS libraries will begin lending materials outside of the system. So I would assume that under this example where we would not resume intra-CCS lending, that means we'd also not resume extra CCS lending. So
And I think, yeah, that's what Scott was getting to. Yeah. Does anyone have an issue with having us all start delivery simply so that we can get our home items back, but still not doing any hold transits?
Yeah, I mean, to Jeannie's point, I would say that if we're just talking about delivery, it could be a library by library basis.
I'm going to say that we shouldn't do that, that if we really want to get our stuff back to our home libraries, the fair and equitable thing is to have all of us participate and all of us get, because like Glencoe might be like, screw you other CCS libraries, as Andy is wont to do.
That's true. We have to keep Glencoe in mind. So
right? Right?
Never, ever would I say such thing.
So his patrons might have checked out a ton of stuff from Northbrook, and he's like, sorry, Northbrook, you're out of luck. Like, I think if we're going to do this, we all need to do this. Yeah, I see nodding heads. So, okay, so then I'm thinking then that the recommendation that all libraries participate in sending material home on June 18th and 25th, and that all CCS libraries resume delivery as a group simply to return items to their home library, but not allow any holds to be sent out on delivery.
Can I ask, so what if somebody wants to send their stuff out?
Don't do it.
They got their staff back?
Don't do it. Don't do it, Scott. Don't do it.
I'm just asking, what's the compelling reason? What's going to be the tipping point for people to say, yes, we're ready to resume interlibrary loans?
For me, it's the Realm Project results.
Right, but this is all assumption that by then some of that will be sorted out. We're talking weeks away. So I'm just curious what the tipping point will be for doing these. If you feel you're staffed and you can fill some holds, just what's the harm?
The harm is that you could kill people. I think that's what the harm is. I mean, seriously. I'll let other people, though, weigh in.
So for me, part of it is I have a sucky building, and it's difficult to have a lot of staff members in there working and not in each other's space. And so I'm really limited in how many people I can have there. So I just don't have the workforce to add on the whole part of resource sharing at this point, you know, until perhaps when we get to phase 4 and there's, you know, more people can be together. I know that technically when you look at the DCOE guidelines, it says you don't count staff in your number of people in the building. But I'm still very cognizant of, can we keep people 6 feet apart? And so that, how many people does that mean I can have physically in this building working at the same time?
This is Diane. We've been doing returns all along, so we have most of our stuff back. We have our staffing at half capacity right now. So we could do that, but we're just not, because we're relying on the group, the hive mind, and saying whatever the group agrees upon, that's what we're going to go with. That's why we switched from 3 days to 7 days on holding the stuff. But, you know, it's just, we're going with the group for now. We'll go with the group going forward, and I would hope that everybody else would do the same.
Yeah, well, that's my question for the group. We're moving forward. We're talking about phase 4. I'm not talking about right now in phase 3. June 29th is expected to be phase 4. It may not be, but if we meet the metrics, all this is dovetailing with that next step of expansion. So my question was, when we're in stage 4, when will people be ready to do interlibrary loan? That's what I'm kind of trying to get at. Not now. Are you going to wait till stage 5 to do ILLs? Is that the general assumption or rule of thumb?
I think we're meeting again on July 8th and we would be discussing it.
That's the question my board is wondering. They're confused. IHLS has talked about resource sharing, and they want to know when they're going to be able to get stuff. And I'm not sure how. I mean, what am I going to tell them if we enter into phase 4 on June 29th? I'm going to say, well, we're going to talk about it on July 8th. I think that's I think that's going to raise some eyebrows.
But I think that the thing that we have to say is we don't have the science to back up the decision yet. And it's really dangerous to jump to conclusions. As Kim was pointing out, we don't have the science. And so we have to wait for the Realm project, which is what we've talked about in the past, that we should wait for the science to make an informed decision and a safe decision, so that we're not putting our patrons and our staff at additional risk when it's not necessary.
I think we have adequate science right now to be circulating materials. And I think that bringing materials from other libraries is just circulating materials more widely. So I don't think that sending materials between libraries really goes that much against what we're already doing, circulating our own collections. But I do agree. I think Diane said it, and Kim, that we don't have, we are working in 3 teams. So I only have a third of my staff in the building at a time. So to pull the additional materials, get them tagged, do all that, we don't really have the space to have that additional process right now. I think we're comfortable with the concept of circulating materials between libraries. We just don't have the space to keep everybody distanced and to have, you know, the room where we usually do that right now is our dirty room where all the materials are being returned. So we'd have to have different spaces to be able to get all that done and enough staff to do it. And I think that's the bigger holdup for us. We need more people in the building in order to add that additional process.
I would also argue, I know Jeannie said that we were talking about that she had said, like, well, we might then need to quarantine items for an additional 7 days when it comes in. And I think that if we as a group that we need to decide that. I am not personally willing to, when I feel safe to do intra-CCS loan, to quarantine for 7 days and then have 2 days in delivery and then quarantine for another 7 days. That is putting those material and then having them check out for 3 weeks. That's greatly decreasing the availability of our materials, which concerns me as well. Joe, were you going to say something?
Me, Joe?
Yes.
Oh. Well, I was wondering about, if you send things through interlibrary loan, some communities have a much higher rate of coronavirus than others. So I would think that would be a cause for concern, and to keep in mind.
All right, what other thoughts do people have?
We wouldn't be sending anything out that hasn't already been quarantined for 7 days. So I don't have an issue really. Anything that's on our shelves that we can pull and give to one of our patrons at our curbside or put in a blue bin and sent to another library has been quarantined for 7 days. And I would trust that any library that was sending materials has already quarantined those materials for 7 days. I don't feel that when we receive the bins that we have to quarantine things for an additional 7 days. I thought that was what we had talked about earlier, that the CTS drivers and the Rails drivers are, known quantities. And so we don't need to quarantine after they have handled the materials, only after patrons or other unknown quantities have handled the materials. So I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm just concerned about, what's happening in other communities if I know that the material that's coming to my library, wherever it's coming from, has already sat untouched by patrons for 7 days or more, then I'm not opposed to receiving it.
But I think the key here is that we all have to be on the exact same page in order to do this. And it sounds like we are not. And so I would rather just wait until we can, do it safely. I think that this is, like Diane said, like we all need to act as a group. And if we all as a group say we're not going to quarantine, we trust that this has been quarantined, we're not going to quarantine when we receive it. But it sounds like that we're kind of at different places. So I do want to pull back and just kind of talk about the thought of just pausing holds until the July 8th meeting, saying that CCS, that we will do the June 18th and June 25th rails, and then we will continue doing delivery simply to get our items back to our home library between now and the July 8th meeting. I would also argue that we should put in to the motion that whatever decision we make, we have to make as a group. I think that if we're going to be restarting anything, we have to all agree to do it together, not only because of the work it would take for CCS, but also for the messaging for our patrons, and just to show that we are a united front. I think that that's really important.
Yeah. I completely agree, Kate.
So, okay, so
I have a procedural question about that, and this, I guess, is because I'm new. Are consensus decisions written into the bylaws? Does the group have to agree on everything?
No.
Okay, I guess I'm just, I see where you're coming from, and I see that this is an extraordinary circumstance, but I'm concerned about setting a precedent where every single library has to agree to something to move forward. What if we have one library that's a holdout until December?
Oh, I'm just suggesting a simple majority yes vote.
Yeah.
Okay, when you said everybody has to agree to it, that was what concerned me.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so motion second, simple majority vote, that then we would all agree that whatever the simple majority voted on is what we would do.
Yeah.
Good point, Jeannie. Thanks for clarifying, or having me clarify that.
And can I just ask, or make a point of clarification? So if the board voted today to hold off on resource sharing until the July 8th meeting, if you start delivery, because you need to give Rails a week's notice to participate in delivery outside of this 18th and 25th, everyone's going to do that. So if you had said, like today, we're gonna keep cruising with delivery after the 25th, you've already got your delivery infrastructure in place. So then if the board said on July 8th, you know what, we're feeling good, our pick lists are under control, our staffing levels are good, our workload's okay, like the realm study sounds good, we want to do delivery, we want to do resource sharing. CCS, if all of the libraries go back to delivery as a group, we can make that setting change for delivery, for the actual resource sharing itself that day. So it would be effective the next day. And I'm looking at Deborah to nod or shake her head or panic. Yeah, so there wouldn't necessarily be like a lot, like we wouldn't have to say like in 3 weeks when CCS can get this done. It might take a little bit longer to go through and undo some of the custom pack changes that have been done around like language, but the actual like turning on the ability to place holds for patrons, if everybody does it as a group, we can get done the day that that decision is made, or target it for a different day. But
okay.
If the reason for holding off is the results of the realm study, if we get to July 8th and we still don't have the results of the realm study, are we saying that we're not going to proceed?
That would be how I would vote.
And so that's why I'm wondering about setting hard and fast dates. If Illinois is doing the science and using metrics to determine moving forward, then why wouldn't, rather than an arbitrary date, why wouldn't we just say when Illinois moves to phase 4, we would move forward?
Because Illinois hasn't done the research on libraries. We've been noticeably absent in all
I'm wondering if
communication.
anyone else has a response.
Lauren, I agree with you. I all along have been concerned about waiting for the realm study because I just don't have any guarantee that it's going to come out in July or August or whatever. I think that we need to have, I think that it's a valuable piece of information if it comes out, but I'm concerned about pegging everything to that study.
I agree, mostly because everything out of Canada is they're only doing 3-day quarantine, and that's across the country. So it just seems strange that we're doing 7 days and we're holding, some libraries are, well, there's a listserv discussion for the director's listserv for Rails. A lot of them are saying they're doing 3 days, but Rails is Rails checking to make sure people are doing 7 days before they put stuff in those bins? There's just too many questions, and holding up for that just seems detrimental to servicing our patrons right now.
I feel like serving our patrons is keeping them safe, though, and that's how I'm coming at it. Heidi, did you have something?
I do, thank you. I've really struggled with this because I think that it's really difficult to say, well, once we have is it definitive that 100% once the realm study is out that everyone will follow it, everyone will be safe, everyone will be this. And when that date is, I think is really, really difficult. For Park Ridge, we started our pickups last week. And so, we could make it. We could make it to wait for a July 8th discussion, very much so. I think that it's really difficult when we're thinking about weighing science, science that's in progress, science we already have, our feelings of common sense and applying the science that currently exists, meeting with demand for what our community needs and expects. I don't have any right answers, but I think that Park Ridge would be okay waiting for July 8th, but not necessarily saying we'll wait indefinitely for realm.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. I'm having a little confusion here though with some of the process, because I guess I didn't have it in my mind that I was picking stuff to share, then quarantining it for 7 days, and then putting it in a bin, which is counter to the return process. So I guess in my mind, I was imagining stuff from elsewhere comes to Crystal Lake. It doesn't matter if it came from my patrons or from you. I'm quarantining it for 7 days then to, you know, mix it up. Now I'm quarantining, and so then I get stuff from you, but that's okay. But other stuff that comes back has to, that's confusing.
Well, and once we open up our libraries to patrons and they start touching the materials on the shelves, do we then have to quarantine for 7 days after you pull stuff for the pick list?
Well, that's what I thought I heard it being said, that Rails expected we had quarantined the stuff for 7 days before we sent it on. That implies we pick it and then we set that day's pick aside for 7 days and don't put it in the bin till then. No?
I'm going to let Rebecca weigh in on this.
So I think that the Rails documents that are going to come out hopefully in the next day or so will address some of this. Again, I just saw a draft and they were like actively, like I could see changes being made to it when I looked at it. So they are working on a flow chart that specifically kind of outlines when the quarantine is supposed to happen because there's so much confusion around this. So I do think, and I can make sure I can send them another request to make sure this is included. I do think that their request or requirement would be different if you have open stacks or closed stacks, because they're saying, you know, like the stuff in your library right now, that's essentially been quarantined for 100 days, right? Like however long we've been closed. But if you reopen the building to patrons and staff and people are out there, you know, as Kate said, touching stuff, then, you know, those items being pulled, I would think do need to be quarantined. But I think that the Rails document will have to address that. Whereas, you know, stuff coming, like the assumption is that anything that goes in the bin has already been quarantined for 7 days, and then the only people touching it after that 7-day period are library staff or Rails staff or Rails contracted staff. I mean, I think that's what Rails is asking for. They don't have a way to enforce it though, for sure. Do libraries have to like sign off? Do they have to like date the bins? And that was one of my questions, and the answer was no. Like if it's in the bin, it's assumed that it's been quarantined for 7 days. So.
Yeah, so that takes me back to the whole space issue. I don't know about the rest of you, but you're looking at least 7 days worth of someplace to quarantine. You know, you pick, you got to quarantine that for 7 days and keep that separate from the next day that you're picking for resource sharing. What if you checked it in and then it moved on? It's a whole other level of complexity that I don't feel like we need.
My understanding from what you had said at the beginning, Rebecca, was that if our stacks are not open to patrons, if it's staff only, and the staff pick the materials and put them in the blue bins, they can go. They don't have to quarantine for 7 days before they can go.
My understanding would be if your stacks are closed and it's library staff only who are touching the material, and the material has already been quarantined for 7 days, so the item was returned and then quarantined for 7 days, and then you check it in and it's got a hold for transit, you could put it right in the bin. The item's been on the shelf untouched for 7 days, you could pull it and put it in the bin. But I think that changes if your stacks are not, you know, closed to patrons. And one of the reasons my recommendation was to wait until July was just seeing where all of the libraries are in terms of restarting services. You know, the Glencoe has been doing curbside the longest. We have other libraries whose staff are like just coming back to the buildings now. So, you know, folks are in very different places in terms of working into, like settling into new workflows. So one of my considerations as someone who is kind of like back here on the outside was, I don't want to like give this other big responsibility to people when, you know, they're struggling to keep up with what they have right now and they're under these different stressors. So that was part of my recommendation. I think there's been a lot of good discussion, you know, both ways. What are our patrons' expectations? How are we able to best serve them? What is the set? Like there's a lot there. So from a CCS point of view, moving forward as a group is important because of the CCS workload, one, but also because of that patron experience where now we can easily tell patrons, right now, only our material can fill your holds. We're not allowed to send stuff back and forth. You know, if libraries then start opting in one by one, that messaging is like, okay, well, like these 6 libraries can fill your holds, but like not these, like just place a hold and see what happens. So I would strongly argue against that. So, you know, I wanted to be protective of the libraries that were maybe slower to restart or in communities that had a higher impact, you know, have different staffing or space constraints than others. But I think essentially it's going to come down to what the majority is the most comfortable with. I'm not allowed to call the question, but
Yeah, so I am though. So I'm gonna ask for a motion to approve that moving forward, all CCS libraries resume delivery as a group. All libraries will participate in sending material home on June 18th and 25th. Until the July 8th Governing Board meeting, the only delivery that will happen will be returning library materials to their owning library.
Starting on the 29th.
Starting on the 29th.
So
I would make that motion.
Okay, thanks, Kim.
Jeannie will second.
Thanks, Jeannie. Any further discussion on the motion? Or if anyone needs me to reread it? All right, hearing none. Beth, could you do roll?
I'll start with Crystal Lake,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Ela,
Yes.
Evanston,
Yes.
Fox River Valley,
No.
Fremont,
Yes.
Glencoe,
Yes.
Glenview,
Yes.
Grays Lake,
Yes.
Highland Park,
Yes.
Huntley,
Yes.
Indian Trails,
Yes.
Lake Villa,
Yeah.
Lincolnwood,
Yes.
Morton Grove,
Yes.
Niles,
Yes.
Northbrook,
Yes.
Palatine,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
Prospect Heights,
Yes.
Round Lake,
Yes.
Wilmette,
Yes.
Winnetka,
Yes.
Zion.
Yes.
Thank you. Algonquin,
Yes.
Carrie.
Yes.
All right. Rebecca, is there anything else COVID-19 response related that you wanted to mention?
no, I don't have anything unless there are other questions.
Any other questions for Rebecca?
I have one.
Sure, Emily, yeah.
Would it be worth discussing it? Because now I'm thinking about closed stacks, open stacks, and that seems like maybe something we should discuss at July 8th, whether we're all doing that. Like maybe we need to decide whether we're all going to have closed stacks until the realm study comes out. If we start delivery, that seems important.
Yeah, quick show of hands. When people in their phased reopening plans are opening their building to the public, who is starting with closed stacks?
And we haven't even made that decision yet. So
okay, so it looks like, yeah, that's definitely not a unanimous decision by any stretch of the. So perhaps, Rebecca, are you thinking what I'm thinking?
I'm thinking you're thinking like a survey. I was just thinking like I was making a note.
I am thinking of a survey, just a really quick survey about closed stack, open stacks, just to see where people are at. Yeah.
Well, at Evanston, Chicago's already open, and we get a lot of. So once rail delivery starts back up at Evanston, we're going to get Chicago materials, and their stacks are already open. So I mean, I don't think it even applies just for CCS. So some libraries are already, you know, CPL, for example, has already moved to OpenStack.
Good point.
But they haven't been making the most informed decisions, so
Yeah,
don't think we should hang our hat on that.
I will also, as I said earlier, shoot Rails a note that and ask them to address closed stack versus open stacks in the whole quarantine workflow, just to clarify their expectations on that.
Yeah, Jeannie, do you have something?
I just want to make a clarification here too, because I feel like we're talking about this in different ways, and maybe people don't realize it. You know, some people seem to be talking as if, you know, we have to quarantine a material anytime it's touched by a patron, but not anytime it's touched by a staff member. And I know you know, our staff are all wearing masks and gloves, but we also know that gloves are only good until the moment someone touches their face, and that people can be asymptomatic. And so, like, what's happening in my library right now is patrons return things, we quarantine them for 7 days, but then they get checked in by one person, they get shelved by another person, they get pulled on the pick list by another person, they get taken out to curbside by another person. We are not quarantining for 7 days in between each one of those. You know, so when we talk about closed versus open stacks, I don't understand why it's different if a staff member gets a book off a shelf and touches the shelf versus a patron. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, I agree. I agree with what Jeannie just said, definitely. And we're not at Evanston. It's going to be so logistic. We get moving so many items back and forth here and we have 4 locations to try to figure out who's touched what. We're just going to have to assume other libraries that we were receiving him have done the quarantine. But it's also terrible customer service to even start letting patrons get these holds and then saying, oh, they're going to have to wait 7 days, somebody touches it. Some of these patrons are going to place these holds and not see the material for 3 weeks. And in my mind, we shouldn't even offer the service unless we feel like we can deliver it with some sort of, you know, accuracy and get it done within the normal amount of time to place the holds and get it into the patron's hands.
All right, so I think we need to definitely talk about this at the July 8th meeting. Does anyone have anything else that they want to mention related to the COVID-19 response? Okay, then the only thing left is my report, and the only thing I really have to report is just to remind everyone that Vicki Novak and Jane Conway are both retiring on June 30th. Normally, we would have had some type of celebration for them. That is not happening, so I encourage all of you, if you have not, to reach out individually to wish them well. My understanding, and Terry can confirm this, is that Vicki is going to be staying on as a consultant until the new director is in place, which they're hoping to be sometime in August. So she'll still be around-ish, right? Is that right, Terry?
She's going to be kind of part-time until June 30th. And then I think that's it. Or I'm sorry, July 30th.
July 30th. Okay. So so please do that. I'm sure that for many of you, you'll be also grateful to know that this is my last meeting and I'm turning over the baton to Sarah after this. And so at the July 8th meeting, she will be running it. We will have Diane as our newly minted secretary, and we will continue on as we have been. And that is all I had. So thank you all very much for coming today. I declare the meeting adjourned at 11 a.m. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.